my presentation is a hacker's guide to cheap next generation firewalls. It was a pretty low level talk when I started developing it, but I'll try to keep it at a high level as I kind of go over some of the ideas contained in this talk. And if you have any questions, let me know. I'll try to explain things as I go along. Is there a way to see chat? Why? Okay, cool. I'm gonna look at the chat as well. I probably won't be able to read it, but if you have any questions, let me know. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so who am I? My name is Trevon Williams. I'm a PhD student from UNC Charlotte. I'm a director of education for the Fortnite Security Division, which is an ethical hacking club. We also host a conference, and I'm a defense competition enthusiast. And so some of the ideas that come and are presented in this talk come from my experience of doing or participating in defensive competitions like DOE Cyberforce, CCDC, which are available to college students. And I believe they have different kind of competitions for high school age kids, but I mainly participate in the college competitions. So in terms of the research that I've been engaging in for my program is I've been looking into resilient and autonomic systems, which are basically well-integrated systems that try to be agile, self-managing, self-healing. And to do that, I've created like a software-defined network and Linux container environment, which I'll explain a little bit more. So the idea of autonomic basically is a self-managing, self-resilient environment that uses feedback loops to improve itself and to remediate specific issues. And so the idea of this kind of moonshot is to be resilient by default and to kind of automate remediation in the system on intelligence. And so this kind of idea combines the two fields of cybersecurity and information technology. But why does this relate to next generation firewalls? How does this relate to anything that I'm talking about? So next generation firewalls are kind of like the next step, or were the next step in how to better protect environments. And so you could say that enterprises, people who make firewalls basically marketed this product that basically, improves the security of an entire environment by like this one tool, and by doing so, it connects to all of these different agents within the environment. It can connect to different agents in the environment, and it reduces management cost. I'm interested in next generation firewalls because it relates to automated remediation of issues in environments, but also because it's cool technology. We're in the cybersecurity field, and there's a bunch of different things, different ideas, all happening in the same space, and it's a little bit overwhelming, but this is kind of the space that I landed in. So if I was to break down a next generation firewall into 4 different components, or 3 different components, subtracting the whole firewall aspect of it is there's policy management, which basically is who has access to what in an environment. So you can, that's something that if you are in IT or you're coming into cybersecurity, access controls are something that's enforced pretty heavily, or people in cybersecurity want to enforce pretty heavily, because you don't want people being able to do things in your environment that they shouldn't be able to do. You don't want someone who's a guest to be able to use admin controls. You want next generation firewalls also provide this idea of sandboxing. If there's a malicious service happening in the environment, you want to be able to isolate it from everything else. But then also you want to be able to prevent those different types of intrusions. And so intrusion prevention and sandboxing kind of goes together and plays into the same thing. And so when you think about next generation firewalls, or to visualize it, you have the next generation firewall at the gateway, and then you have all your other different tools built into the environment. And this is from Fortnite. So you can see kind of the layout structure to visualize what does it look like to have a firewall in front of your setup. Okay. So how does software-defined networking play a part in this? I mentioned software-defined networking earlier. Software-defined networking, simply explained, is a programmatic way to manage your network. So basically, you have a software-defined network controller that manages different software-defined switches in an environment. So when you think about the next generation firewall, you have all of these different zones. Not sure if you can see my mouse or not, but you have these different zones. It's breaking, there's different managed zones in the environment. The firewall can split into different sections, but when you think about software-defined networks, each switch, which is managing whatever LAN you have, can be managed by the controller or multiple controllers that are communicating. And so this is a very interesting idea. One, because it's free. Software-defined network is really shaking up how things are done. It's powering the cloud and data centers as we know it. The reason that clouds can even host multi-tenant or you can have your own cloud instance is because they're able to segment these cloud networks using software-defined network technology to have multi-tenant resources. And so the management of the controller to the rest of the environment is called southbound, the southbound communication, southbound management. And so from there, you have a controller that's basically able to communicate to the rest of the switches in the environment or to other controllers to basically add flows, to add routes in the environment. And so, for example, before, I guess, software-defined network was more adopted, you had routers and you had switches. Routers basically communicated with other routers, and together they created this whole overview of what the network is. But with software-defined networking, you either have a centralized or distributed controller that communicates the global view of the networking environment to each other, and they're able to efficiently route packets to other things in the environment. This also means that because it's programmatic, you can do traffic steering. There's a lot of research going into traffic steering, traffic optimization, enhancing how traffic or intrusion threats are being redirected in the environment. It's a very kind of interesting technology that has a lot of different implications that are really being explored right now. And then the other kind of side of software-defined networking is the northbound integration. So southbound is between the controller and the switches, and that's mainly being done through a protocol called OpenFlow. Northbound is really kind of the wild west of software-defined networking, where you can connect basically anything to your controller if you build the logic into it. And so you can connect intrusion detection systems like Snort. You can connect any kind of threat feeding or analysis tool, but you would have to build in the logic to be able to get provided actionable things. And so we have Kenneth, before we talked about Splunk. Splunk is super powerful because you can look through logs. And I know Splunk Enterprise has this ability to be able to automate based upon things that you build into Splunk. An interesting thing would be to automate basically reactions from Splunk and then connect it to an SDN controller to then be able to redirect to be able to redirect where traffic is happening in the environment to basically remediate issues or to stop things from happening. And so I'm going to swap over to this other screen really quick. New share. I'm gonna move these windows. If I can I zoom this? Okay. This is probably a terrible terminal. Okay. I'm not sure if you can see this, but it's not letting me zoom. Okay. Well, so I have this environment. I'm using Terraform to basically spin up this environment, LXC environment, which is 4 different controller or container zones, each managed by controller. And so I like to kind of test out different things in containerized environments. And the cool thing about LXD is it allows you to manage containers and allows you to manage VMs. And it's basically just a free VMware or VirtualBox that you can really kind of think about. And so I have this, let's see if I can move this, zoom. I have this controller over here. I called it Locus. And basically Locus, what it does is it's a controller that also connects to the Snort socket. And so I'm just gonna change this really quick. So I have this Snort listener. Actually, I can't change that really quick. But I have this Snort listener. I'll open it back up. That basically opens up the Snort socket file and then parses out the alert. The alerts basically say, hey, Snort has detected this in the environment, or it gives you this big block of information of what's happening, and you can basically do whatever you want to do from there. And so if I go into the environment, oh, I'm already in the environment. Let me just kill Snort really quick. And I go to restart Snort, so it's not working. I'm just gonna run Snort in not daemon mode, so you can see the alerts. Listen to the socket. TechL is the port where you want to put your logs, and then the script path. Okay, starting Snort really quick. So this container, the master container that I'm in, has a port that mirrors to everything in the environment, which is typical for Snort installations. And so if I was to basically do an nmap scan, so I had to install an nmap on this container. If I was to do an nmap scan, I should get a Snort alert that there was a scan that happened in the environment. So port 22 install stacks open. Let's see if it pops up. See if I had this. Oh, I had it on the wrong mode. Sorry about that. Really quick. I forgot a flag for the intrusion prevention system for Snort being enabled. So that's correct. Tech I, oh wait, no. Tech Q, D, I. It's not Tech Q. Okay, try that again. Try something really quick. If that fails, you copy and paste your script. Daemon mode. I may have broke a configuration file when I rebuilt this environment with Snort. So I'll just kind of go over this from a high level view since the alerts. I'm sorry. I'll go back to the presentation. Okay. And then I'll push the code so that if anyone wants to see what happened or how to do this in the environment. So basically, what I was trying to show is with Snort, you can basically configure Snort to give you alerts, and you can configure the alerts to go to a socket. When you're using a software-defined network controller, you can basically have the controller to connect to the socket. In the socket, you'll basically have to parse through a bunch of the alert information, and while parsing through the information, you can detect based upon what type of rules that you configure. You can configure the alerts to basically say, hey, Snort found a scanning event, an ICMP packet coming on this port, and it's from this destination MAC address to this destination MAC address, and then I can use the controller to send an update packet to the SDN switch in the environment. And so with that, you're basically creating a next generation firewall without paying any vendor. But that's a very rudimentary implementation of a next generation firewall. You need the sandboxing features, which basically you can do in this environment if you connect the controller to some automation tool like SolStack, which is future work within this research. You can connect it to anything via northbound. And so the idea that I'm really trying to present is the whole DevSecOps idea, right, is a lot of vendors are kind of proposing these different ways to implement specific features, whether it be sandboxing, policy enforcement, and management. And at the same time, there's implications, there's security implications about enforcing it through centralized ways. For example, the SDN controller traditionally, or started out traditionally, is a centralized way to manage networks. Because it's centralized, and if an attacker takes over the controller, he can then update flows to any switch, redirecting traffic, and at the same time, he can basically take over the network without you really knowing because he has control of the controller. But then when you think about the distributed impact or the distributed integration of these types of tools, utilizing centralized logs and then distributing kind of the mechanisms that are able to control the environment, you have the possibility or the potential to kind of mitigate that problem that the centralized configurations present. So if we go back to the idea of the next generation firewall, sandboxing, intrusion prevention, policy enforcement. If you were to use, I guess, not a controller written from scratch, but if you were to use a controller like Open Daylight, for example, Open Daylight has a web GUI that you can basically do policy enforcement, and then you can also configure it to connect to sandboxing and intrusion detection utilities via its northbound scripts and its different APIs. And so the power is there. You just have to kind of invest some time into learning the different tooling, learning about the different ideas of how these things happen. But generally, the overview of the idea is the most important. Why is it important? Automation is super powerful, and it needs to be intelligently built in. Thinking about how the centralization of different automation tools, for example, lead to people taking over those automation tools and then spinning up different things in the environment. For example, I heard about a horror story about someone took over an Azure account and was able to spin up different instances in the environment via the tooling that they had built into it. I believe they were using some Ansible integration that used certificates to basically deploy. Like if you had the certificate, you could deploy using Ansible in their environment. And someone took over that and they were able to deploy a bunch of different instances that they were using for cryptocurrency mining, which is very interesting. And also at the same time, you can make tools work for you. You don't have to always pay people to kind of get these cool features. A lot of the times, people are building on top of other different other ideas. For example, VMware, Microsoft, all have these really cool network implementations that they market as like you can easily manage your network. But for the most part, most of them are built on top of Open vSwitch, which is something that I was just using to manage or to network these different controllers. And so if you have the opportunity to pay for something, it does save you time, but also on the same token, there's other people who are working on free and open source utilities that potentially do the same thing. And so that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, let me know. You can catch me on Twitter. I have a website. I update it for the most part. I'm going to be posting the controller code in the environment once I can figure out why the configuration was wrong, but that should be pinned to the top of my GitHub with the controller. I'm also actively working on it for research, and so if it's not updated, it's probably because the updates are in a private repository, and then I'll document it and push more updates to the GitHub page. So if you have any questions, let me know.